Thank you, Anna. I know it has been a very, very good, very interesting day for us, and you must be really tired. If I would have to summarize some of the key themes or noticeable points, maybe the first point is that our Asia Global Fellows are so outstanding. Many of you probably are wondering who they are, what they do, and so on, for them to be so good. The Asia Global Fellows Program is a program that was started at AGI 3 years ago. So Patrick Lowe was the first director of the program, and then Casey Kwok here, he's the current director. So this program, without making this too long, is for mid-career professionals who have a promising future. So I would really like all of you to recommend those who are promising and who are very energized, have a great future, invite them or encourage them to apply to this program. And also I would like to use this opportunity to thank the Tenodo Foundation and the New World Foundation for their support for the many years to come. So the funding for this program is very solid. So if that's one question that came up on your mind, okay. So the second point, or the second very noticeable point from today's multiple sessions is that the rising inequality seems to be a major driver of much of the popular discontent, disruptions, interruptions, and many other things that are happening in Hong Kong and beyond. So we have to work on this some more. And then the third noticeable point, maybe even more discouraging, that is we're all concerned about whether globalization will continue or not continue. So I have to say that it is times like this we should really look back and reflect, because the world has come a long way. You know, I cannot help but think that, you know, going back 1,200 years, it used to take 1 year to do a round trip when the Arabs and Persians first came to China to spread Islam and then to engage in trade. And then even back in 1854, when the first ever Chinese student, Rong Hong, when he graduated from Yale, it took him more than 150 days to come back to Hong Kong and Macau from New York after he boarded the boat. And then, of course, to make it closer to home, there was not much of a Hong Kong back then, 150 years or 160 years back. So today we have such a great place called Hong Kong, and even better, the Li and Fong group, right? There was no Li and Fong group 150 years ago. And then, you know, the Li and Fong group has played such a big role in promoting globalization. The very fact that this company has been doing so well and so influential, in particular, leading to the founding of the Fong Global Institute and the Asia Global Institute, all of that is very encouraging, positive evidence to make us more optimistic about the future of globalization. So I know all the earlier sessions have one way or another touched up on globalization. So we will try to talk about this in this session as well, but we should try to go beyond the areas that have not been so much touched up on in the earlier sessions. So for the next 60 minutes or so, we're going to proceed in the following way. So Sam and Kishore will each have about 10 minutes to offer their remarks, and then I will have some dialogue with them, and then I will open it to all of you. Okay. Sam, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll try my best. This is such an easy subject to discuss. U.S.-China tensions. Although, as I was thinking about what I would comment upon, I reflected on an article I'm sure none of you read. It was in Foreign Affairs in 2006, where I penned a piece on the future structure of a corporation based upon globalization. And it was called the Globally Integrated Enterprise that was going to replace the multinational model. Again, not that you would have read it, it was sort of boring, but the second to last paragraph in that piece, I cautioned and I said that, I argued all the benefits of globalization, but I said there are groups that are going to be disadvantaged in these transitions, and if that business, academia, and governments don't come together to address their concerns, it could end up in populism, regional leaders, or worst of all, civil disorder. Well, I guess that was a little prosaic, needless to say, because those of us in the business community who had benefited greatly in this evolution, as well as our employees and shareholders and everything else, did not reach out to work with the appropriate constituencies to make progress on those subjects. I would say in the U.S., it's not like a lot of us didn't try, but let's put that aside. It's an editorial comment. So then I thought back to what I talked about last year when we were here, and I was very optimistic about the potential improvement in the relationships of the two largest economies of the world, and perhaps I was naive because a year has passed, and what we still have on both sides, and we can argue about who is causing most of this, it's still bickering, and it's tactical bickering day to day, and it's not really addressing some of the underlying concerns that both nations have, and which is legitimate as we go back and forth. And then, as you know, as we've all read, they'll come up with a phase one agreement, and the phase one agreement, I'm sure the people in this room, the economists, know better than I, but from what we understand, it's mostly just superficial and still doesn't address the underpinning tensions that exist between these two nations, which is unfortunate. And it's this kind of behavior that leads to some of what we see in the young people, not just their inability to see opportunity, but in the lack of leadership. We did a study in my think tank. Zogby is a big polling firm in the United States. They do a lot of the presidential polls. Victor, you'd be pleased to know they just released a poll that said, Zogby said that, I said when Mike Bloomberg first ran for mayor that he couldn't win as a business guy, and he won 3 elections. So I'm saying this time he might not win, but I'm not betting against him. So I guess that's a sign of encouragement as we get into the process here. But the point of the survey that we had conducted through CGE, I mentioned that earlier, was that we looked at North America, so it's Mexico, Canada, and the United States, in detail on millennials and Generation Z, and I briefly mentioned this before, how they see the world. And it's really not lack of opportunity. I mean, and maybe it was a subset of the group that Zogby had surveyed, but it wasn't that at all. They see the world as a great opportunity for change, and they understand and they buy into change. In fact, in the specific question, if technology implemented your job, i.e. artificial intelligence, or I call augmented intelligence, would you still be positive on change? And universally, they said yes, because they thought we need change for the better. So they're driven by change because they see a world where they are not watching progress being made by the leaders in those societies. And I broadened it beyond just the T factor. I mean, it's easy, I guess one of our speakers said earlier, it's easy to blame the T factor. And those of us that grew up in the New York area understand him for really what he is, which is probably worse than you see in his public life. But having said that, he was able to capture the emotion of 64 or 63 million voters. I mean, so I mean, as Mike Bloomberg said to me one night, I know you guys, you elitists here think that, that the guy's crazy and I should run. But remember, 63 million people agree with him, and nobody agrees with me. So that's kind of where we are in the process. So having said that, the reason I bring this point up, because if you look at the two leading economies of the world that are supposed to be the mature people in these discussions, and I'm not commenting on either side, the behavior is not one of maturity. It's not looking at the lens of a world that could be better as a result of their working together on a progressive agenda that addresses a lot of the concerns that we've discussed the past couple of days in this conference. And for whatever sets of reasons, it's in the tit for tat. And it's still in for tit for tat. Now, I accept the fact that it's more complicated today when you put technology into those discussions. And it's not just market access is important, intellectual property is important, but there's an overriding concern today that didn't exist in the past called dual-use technology or national security. And the technologies today that are pretty much commodity and available also can be applied for purposes of national security. This is different. For those of us who worked with governments, for hundreds of years through multiple wars and everything else, they were separated. We all did work for government, for national defense purposes, and that was a different set of technologies than we commercialized. That's all changed, which is why in Mike's comments, you have the reaction from the employees at Google and those kinds of firms that say don't bid on these large multi-billion-dollar government contracts because it's either the security agencies or the Defense Department and those sorts of things, whereas before they were separate. But no different than the United States, China has the same sets of technologies. China has excellent engineers. China has a great school system. China has great AI capability. China will be ahead of the United States in 5G. I mean, I think there's no doubt about that. The U.S. will still be arguing about the regulations that will be deployed, those sorts of things. And so as a result, there's another layer of complexity. Now, as I say this, it doesn't mean that there can't be progress on some things that result in economic growth. I mean, there's always been issues around national security, and even in nuclear arms, treaties were signed, and and standards were established. And you could do the same thing in these technologies, whether it's around cyber or encryption. And everybody, in many ways, has, I'll call it, similar threats, which are some rogue nations. I mean, if I was either China or the United States, I'd worry less about each other when it comes to these kinds of threats than the rogue nations. So there's no reason not to cooperate, even in the area of national security, no different than NATO nations cooperate in the areas of national security. But that is I call it a positive path to the future. So I'll connect back to the surveys that we had done. And it's not just China, U.S. There are many other factors when these young people look out. Yes, it's some of it's opportunity because they feel like they've been somewhat disenfranchised. But some of it, they see this need for change for the betterment of society, whether that's in climate or whether that's in trade or economic growth, and they don't see leaders doing anything. That's what frustrates them. There's no one doing anything, and that's the frustration. So I guess a hopeful path to the future, and I might be Pollyannish as I say these things, I believe, and I am a business person, so I reflect my background and my biases, but in the past, where a lot of these issues were resolved, even between the U.S. and Japan, I was living in Japan at that point in time, the business communities came together and formed things like the Japan Society, the Asian Society, the European Council, what have you, and worked together on a progressive agenda to solve some of these issues to take the tension out of the government. The other thing that occurred, which has broken down, at least I know from the U.S. side, because remember, friends of mine were Secretary of State and economic advisors to the existing administration, the working relationship beyond the executive branch or beyond the senior-most levels of government have completely broken down between our nations. This is what I was hearing. I don't know if that's still the case because my friends all got fired. They got fired because they said he doesn't read the documents that they prepare for him, which is true, by the way. But I mean, I guess it's a fireable offense in the current world that he doesn't read. But so all those interconnections could be reestablished. There's no reason why they can't be reestablished, even at the working level, within government, or within the business community, to begin to make the case for why we're all better off, regardless of who numbers 1 and number 2. I mean, you know, does it really matter to the citizens of the United States if the economy still grows at 3%, whether they were 1 or 2? Do you think anybody's really going to care if there's unemployment stays at 3% and wages are up 4 to 5% year to year and education's been fixed and solved? Do you think they really care? I don't think that. I mean, I bet you if you polled them, would they really care if they're now 2? I don't think they're going to care. They care about themselves and their own personal lives. So if you make them better, they're going to be with you. And if you make it harder on them, they're going to be against you. And I think I can't speak for China. I mean, it's impossible for me to do that as an American. And I'm certainly not, I hope I'm not coming across as the alpha dog here, whatever the term was from Andrew. But I honestly believe that as a world and as a nation, we all would be better off to reconnect on a more civil, progressive agenda than we are currently on at this point in time. So I leave that the thought, and I'll pass over to my colleague, or I guess, how are we going to do this? Yeah.
Okay, let me follow on this with you a little bit, Sam. Yeah, so as Kishore would like to say, okay, let me give you Exhibit A. So that is, can I find an area where we can address some of the issues we're confronting in terms of decoupling, interconnectivity, and so on. Over those years, being a finance professor, I've been taking MBA students to visit China, Africa, and other countries. So one thing that impressed me so much was the business schools at American universities have contributed so much to globalization. In the sense that everywhere I have been to, everyone speaks the same language, the same business language, same business model, business strategy, and then cost of capital, return on equity, return on assets. And the same thing can be said about American law schools, because today, almost every country that has done anything over the last 40 years in corporate law, commercial law, securities law, they have one way or another taken the American laws as the basis to start from and then introduce their own localizations. So given that national security and many other concerns are very much above the surface, so some decoupling in the educational system in terms of not accepting students from Asia or maybe not even students from India and other countries. So that may actually go to the root of the forces that have really contributed to globalization. Yes. So are you concerned that Trump and his people or your friends who are advising Trump are really going to go that far to restrict visa applications and foreign students from coming to study in the U.S.?
Well, the first thing is, I remember all my friends got fired, so I'm sort of limited now with my access to the Pennsylvania Avenue. But I, quite honestly, the issue is wrapped up in immigration, as we all know, and it's crazy. I mean, if you go back to it starts after the World Wars. If you go back to the history of all this, I'll call it educational sharing of students, foreign exchange students, whatever it happened to be, my understanding, and I'm not an academic, was that, maybe some of my friends can help me, was that if people learned and understood each other's cultures, there'd be less risk of war. And that's how it all began, quite honestly, and bi-directionally. It wasn't just one way, people coming to the U.S. or vice versa. And there was a way to get all of our countries interconnected at the societal level, right? It would be absolutely insane, not that there aren't crazy things going on for a period of time, to break that down. Because it's that common, I guess we don't want to use the term values here. I learned about the 5 religions in China. You were lecturing with this earlier, and I should have taken closer notes. But I do think it's the understanding of these cultural subtleties that go a long way to have dialogue when there's tense moments that occur, and there's interrelationships that our friends can call each other, right? As when because I lived here, I lived in Japan, and I still have lots of relationships, but when things get complicated, people can reach out to each other through the relationships that they've built. That would be absolutely insanity, quite honestly, in my opinion, by the way. The other thing I would mention, and I know this seems crazy, I learned this in Japan, not the United States. When I first went to Japan, I'd have dinner with all my other colleagues, many of which were customers of IBM Japan, and they talked about the semiconductor cycle. And, I didn't understand. I understood physics, but I didn't understand what they meant by the semiconductor cycle. So I kept probing, what is the semiconductor cycle? They go, well, it's 4 years, and that makes no sense. And Moore's law or any of these things, it makes no sense, this 4 years. Then I realized, oh, that's the U.S. election cycle. So they go, this thing, every 4 years it cycles. And so right now we're fighting over these things. Remember, Japan was going to get rid of the U.S. semiconductor business. IBM had to bail out Intel and memory business, all that. So DARPA was created and all these sorts of things. That's what occurred. I mean, some of the older gentlemen are nodding their heads with me, but that's when all this stuff happened, because that was the election cycle. But everybody understood that this thing was going to turn. This merry-go-round turns, right? And so it's why I'd make the case for why, as long as we stay consistent and stable and work together in the academic and the business communities, the merry-go-round's going to turn again. It might not turn in a year, which would be somewhat sad. I think many of us would look at it that way. But it will turn again, and which is one of the benefits, I think, to the United States, because as it cycles back and forth, and everything is going to the right now will go to the left in about another 24 months.
Thank you. So now let's turn to Kishore.
Thank you. Let me begin, first of all, by thanking Victor for inviting me to this incredible dialogue, and I'm really grateful to you, except that I was going to tell you all, my speech is going to be a hit-and-run operation, because as soon as the session finishes, Rob and I are running to the airport to catch a flight. But let me begin by saying that the subject of today's discussion is supposed to be trade tensions and techno-nationalism. I guess I've learned a new word, techno-nationalism. I didn't know it existed. But this is not about trade tensions and techno-nationalism. This is part of a much bigger, and I think I said this to some of you earlier today, that is absolutely no doubt that a very broad-based, wide-ranging geopolitical contest has already broken out within the world's #1 power, which is the United States of America, and the world's #1 emerging power, which is China. And in some ways, how do you say, the gears have been locked already, and the motion is starting, and what you're going to see unfolding, sadly, is a major geopolitical contest in the next 10 years. And that's why, as I mentioned to some of you, I've just written a book on U.S.-China relations. We published in New York in April with the provocative title, Has China Won? And there are two key messages. And basically, the key message of the book is a paradoxical one, that a major U.S.-China geopolitical contest is both inevitable and avoidable. And actually, I'm also going to talk a bit about the avoidable part. But it's inevitable because, unfortunately, whenever a #1 power is about to be surpassed by the #2 power, it will do whatever it can to suppress it. It has happened for 2,000 years or so. So it's very logical, rational behavior on the part of the United States to thwart the rise of China. And it's being played out, and I must emphasize this, in so many dimensions, in the economic dimension, political dimension, military dimension, cultural dimension, also in what I call the primacy dimension. So that the techno war and the trade war is a very small part of the big game, but it's a critical part. And at the same time, I also want to emphasize that things have already become nasty and will become more nasty. I just happened to read, probably yesterday, President Trump spoke at the Economics Club of New York. And you can see the language he uses, you know. And he says that, on the one hand, he says that there's a deal coming. Then he explains this is why a deal is going to come. He says China is having the worst year in more than half a century. Their supply chains are cracking very badly, and they are dying to make a deal, Trump said. But we are the ones that are deciding whether or not we want to make a deal. Now, if you use this kind of language, which is clearly nasty and condescending, and you saw this in the speeches by Vice President Pence also, you get a real sense of the emotions also that are driving it. And so if you want to understand what's happening, you cannot just focus on the technological war. You have to look at the big picture. But from the big picture, when you drill down to what's happening on the technological front, my key message to you is that, in the 10 minutes I have or so, is that the subjects are both politically and ethically very complex. And I say this because quite often what is portrayed is that this is a simple black and white contest between good and evil, right and wrong. And what I'll try to bring out, if I can, is the complexity of these things. And so I'll start, obviously, with the most obvious and biggest source of the technological dispute between United States and China, which is the actions that United States has taken against Huawei, right? It's China's biggest, there was some actions taken against ZTE, but that's been resolved, but now we are in the big fight with Huawei. So what is going on in this Huawei fight? So if you read the American narrative, what is happening in the Huawei fight is that they believe that since Huawei at the end of the day is nothing but an extension of the Chinese government, Huawei therefore carries, when you install Huawei equipment, you're giving a backdoor to the Chinese intelligence agencies. And so if any country buys Huawei equipment, United States will reduce its dealings with that country because they say, you're allowing Chinese to spy on you. Now, I cannot personally, there's no way I can assess whether or not Huawei has a backdoor or whether or not Huawei is being used by Chinese intelligence agencies. Obviously, I don't have the resources to do that. But the fundamental question is this. Even if it's true that Huawei has a backdoor and is being used by Chinese intelligence agencies, the fundamental question then is, ethical question is, should you just ban equipment that only comes from China that allows spying, or from every country that allows spying, right? And as a philosopher, it's always a question of how do you apply the universal rule. So are you saying that all countries should stop spying? Then if you're saying all countries should stop spying, we know from Edward Snowden, who's revealed it to us, that the United States has the capacity to pick up every telephone conversation in the world. And initially, I thought it was just picking up metadata. Actually, United States doesn't pick up metadata, it picks up data. So if it is ethically okay for the United States to pick up every phone conversation in the world through its equipment, why is it ethically not okay for the Chinese to try to do the same? What's the ethical difference? And then you discover, of course, the assumption behind that is that whatever a liberal democracy does, by definition, is ethically okay because liberal democracies are good. But if a country is run by a communist party, A communist party is by definition evil, and because it is evil, whatever it picks up is ethically wrong. Right? You keep drilling down and you get to the deeper assumptions. Then the rest of the world, of course, has to make then a decision. Is it only okay to cooperate with liberal democracies? And is it ethically wrong to cooperate with communist party systems? And then the situation becomes even more complex if you look at it in terms of their behavior and accountability, right? How do these different systems perform ethically, right? And the remarkable thing, if you compare the performance of the, let's say, the United States system and the Chinese system in terms of improving the well-being of their people, which is at the end of the day what you define whether a system is good or bad, the United States is the only modern developed country where the average income of the bottom 50% has gone down over a 30-year period after 1980. By contrast, the bottom 50% of China have seen the greatest improvement ever in their standard of living since Chinese history began in the last 30 years. So you have a system that is performing extremely well in terms of improving the well-being of the bottom 50%, and a system that has basically damaged the well-being of its bottom 50%. And you say one is ethical, one is not ethical. I bring this dimension to you to tell you that when people say it's a very simple case of, yes, whatever liberal democracy does is right, whatever communist party system does is wrong, it's not so simple to explain. And at the end of the day, behind all these efforts to what I call to try to demonize China in some ways, there is a political impulse that's driving it. It's not just being driven by other factors. So that's in the Huawei dimension. Now let me turn to another. I'm going to go to some very sensitive dimensions, and please forgive me. I just learned that only yesterday or 2 days ago, the company in China that manufactures the largest number of drones in the world has just been put on a blacklist in the United States. And it's been put on the blacklist in the United States because they say this company's equipment is being used to suppress Uyghurs in Xinjiang. That's the justification for blacklisting of the drones company. And maybe it is, and maybe it's justified, and so on and so forth. Again, I don't know. But if you say that suppressing Muslim minorities and killing Muslims is ethically wrong, and I agree that killing Muslims is ethically wrong, if you had to answer a very uncomfortable question, which is which country kills more innocent Muslims? How many people have died as a result of the bombings that have taken place since 9/11? And I'll just give you one statistic, okay? Obama is one of the most peaceful presidents ever. In the last year of his presidency, the United States dropped 26,000 bombs on 7 Muslim countries. And you can imagine how many innocent Muslims died. So if you're saying, and I come back to my same universal rule, that if you're saying what is being done in Xinjiang is wrong, and I'm sure what's done in Xinjiang is wrong, what happens to what's happening to the other Muslims? And how do you apply the same universal rule to American companies that may be involved in the supply of equipment that may be killing Muslims elsewhere? Again, I'm just bringing out the ethical complexity. Now let me turn to another dimension, somewhat different, but also a very key part of what you might call the data information war, right? Now, in this area, as you know, and yeah, I'm talking about social media, there is no doubt that China has built a firewall. It is basically, I think, effectively, China and North Korea are probably the only countries that are keeping out Google, Facebook, and all. And China has developed its own WeChat, Baidu, and so on and so forth. And I think one can then, of course, discuss whether it's wise or unwise for the Chinese to do that. And I'm sure China is paying to some extent some economic price, some political price by not being part of the sort of the more universal Google, Facebook system, for sure. But then when you come to the discussing about the spread of Google and Facebook around the world, it has both positive effects and negative effects. And you know, a few months ago, I gave my first and only TED Talk in Vancouver. But the first person to speak at our session was an amazing English woman. Her name was Carol Cadwallader. If you ever get a chance, please watch her TED Talk, because she documents in amazing detail how Facebook was able to transport outright lies into the Facebook accounts of various people. And that's why this vote on Brexit swung. So these were lies that were being told that led to a political disaster. And she said nobody could regulate Facebook. And when she, as a journalist, tried to get the lies, she couldn't get them. The lies had disappeared in the social media. Now, what's the reason why I bring this up is that in many countries, Brexit, you saw one result. If you have Facebook or Google, which is unregulated, spinning around the world, right? Is it just purely bringing good, or is it also challenging, disrupting societies through fake news and other ways? And then if I want to bring another ethical dimension in about data and the spread of data, why have Facebook and Google made such incredible profits, right? Principle is very simple, access to data. And ironically, the data is often going from poor countries to rich countries. And then the huge profits goes to the rich countries. Is there an ethical question involved here where how can the poor countries that are giving their data away get a share of that data? And this is going to become a bigger and bigger question, because we've just seen the beginnings of this data revolution, because right now I think only about half the world may have smartphones, but I think within 10 years the whole world is going to have smartphones, and the amount of data that's going to come out is even more and more. The question then is, who has the right to harvest, who has the right to use, who has the right to make economic value from this data? So therefore you begin to see there are very big questions involved here. And then you also understand why the Chinese built a firewall and said, hey, we want to be able to control what we are doing in this area. So what you therefore see in what is called a trade and technology war has got far deeper political and ethical dimensions. And you've got to be aware of the political and ethical complexity of these issues when it comes to passing judgments on who's right, who's wrong in this area.
So I think, Kishore, now you have just almost depressed everyone. But before...
I guess complexity is very depressing.
So I want to say that just because now Trump tries his best to replicate some of the Ragu leaders do in other countries, that does not mean the world should not believe in any moral standards or ethical standards. So while you were talking, I just cannot help but you remind me of this research seminar by a professor from the London School of Economics, in which he he tries to see how many years and how long it took the German investors to really price the stocks of those Jewish-founded or Jewish-owned listed companies on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. So the data started in 1932, just as Hitler was, through speech after speech, making it clear that he was going to go after the Jews. But it took it all the way until 1936 for the stock prices of those Jews-related or owned companies to really reflect the new reality of what Hitler would do. So you wonder why it took so many years for the stock market participants to finally realize. Of course, my own interpretation is that people, until they see the reality, because people have very good heart and very nice intentions. They don't want to see the bad things. They don't want to use the potential bad things as a way to make a judgment on any leader or any regime, right? They want to see actual death and killings on the ground. I'm not implying any particular country here. Okay, I'm just saying that maybe because one of your books has a very interesting title, How the West got China Wrong. So Kishore, maybe you could write a book, How You Got China Wrong. No, I'm just joking. Huh? Do you think you got China right now? Oh, now you're increasingly more doubtful about your judgment and analysis? Or you just want to raise those questions to get everyone here to think? So that's why the Asia Global Dialogue is so good, so interesting. So you should all come back next year. Kishore.
So, I must say, Zhiwu, you were right when you said I depress everybody. But I found it interesting how you tried to cheer up everybody. You brought up the Jews in the 1930s, and you said you thought that story would cheer everybody up.
No,
I'm very impressed by your political subtlety. So anyway, actually, I must say I've written 7 books, but I have never written a book called How the West Got China Wrong. But maybe that may be one of my future books. But you're right. I do try to explain China to an Anglo-Saxon media, which has become increasingly negative on China. It is a fact. And I would say to you, Zhiwu, I don't know when were you last in the United States? Huh? But I suggest you go down there, because I go there, 3-4 times a year.
By the way, I'm a U.S. citizen,
Yeah.
so I've voted since 1996. So I'm very familiar with American politics.
Yeah, but that was my point. That was exactly my point. It is my American Chinese friends who are like you, who are now telling me that they are very concerned about the sentiment against China. And it is precisely the American citizens like you. And so that is something that worries me. And I think it's a bit unfortunate. And I do, see, I want to emphasize, I want to be proven wrong. I want to believe that at the end of the day, United States and China will do the right thing which is to focus on improving the well-being of their own people and not focus on who's the number, to quote Andrew Sheng, who's the alpha male in the room. If both United States and China focus on improving the well-being of their people, then I think we will have no problems in the world at all. But unfortunately, as a geopolitical analyst, and since you say I've been writing books a long time, sadly, in the last 20 years, most of the things I've predicted have come true. And I'm prepared to take a bet with you now publicly, in front of everybody, that US-China relations 10 years from now will be much worse. And if you believe otherwise, let's take the bet.
No, okay. There's no point to bet because I agree with you. 10 years from now, the US-China relations will be much worse, very different from what they are today. I mean, my mentioning Exhibit A, as you would say, is really for the purpose to remind us sometimes just because we are good people, we are nice, we want everyone to be happy and live very peacefully, does not mean that there's no one else who may have different views, different plans about how to control or change people's lives. I mean, by controlling people's lives. Sam, you want to say something?
Well, first of all, I'd like to
You must cheer us up, please.
No, I mean, cocktails start in 19 minutes, so I just want everyone to know drinks are available in the reception in 19 minutes. Let me try to. I tried to end on a positive note, but Kishore, I mean, first of all, that I think it's important that folks here understand, at least from the Americans in the room, most of us don't listen to the President of the United States. I mean, he has zero credibility with the population of the United States. I mean, so to assume that he tweets something or he says something and that reflects the attitudes of a country that is quite diverse, I think is an exaggeration, quite honestly. And I don't have your academic credentials. I can only speak for the people that most of the country, and they don't buy into it. They think the guy is a fool. I mean, so that doesn't mean he doesn't have a small base of support where people were disenfranchised because he blamed it on outsourcing of jobs when it really was technology, and none of his facts are ever right. And look, if you fact check him, there's a thing called Pinocchios in the Washington Post. He gets like 5 Pinocchios for lying every day. I mean, so that's just what the press reports, and it's not. I don't think it's fake news that that his facts are never straight. So my only point of it is that I don't think to use the current president as a statement for what the people of the United States think or do, I think is misleading, quite honestly. And there are other things that you commented on that I can't say because I was on the National Security Council. So there's more to what you're reading in the press than you're commenting on, but if I say, my wife and I get executed. So just trust me when I tell you there's more to these things than you might be reporting about. I'll just leave it at that, because I like staying alive. My wife likes it even better than I do. And I have signed the documents that say you can kill me if I talk about these things. Having said that, but I start with a different assumption. Go back 10 years ago when I was working and doing business in China, and the government was a very open place to work as a foreign multinational. Yeah, we hired, I think, 20 or 25,000 people. We hired 80,000 in India, so just have a sense of dimension. It wasn't our biggest place of hiring. But nonetheless, and we could meet with all levels of government. We would express our points of view. They'd have their points of view. You would negotiate in a very pragmatic way. Commerce was conducted. That changed for some reason. I mean, you could argue the fact that the foreign multinationals hired millions of people in China were good for China. I could make that case. You could argue that I put $8 billion into China was good for the Chinese economy, and that is the actual number. It's not fake news. $10 billion into India, by the way. You could say that that was good for that environment. Something changed, Kishore. Something changed. And you should ask ourselves what changed from 2011 when I retired to 2019 today.
Sam, thank you. So while you were talking, I was thinking, I did not sign such an agreement to be the director of AGI. Victor, did I? Sorry, no, nobody got this joke. Okay. Sam said he had to sign this this contract.
Yeah, yeah.
If he would say anything against the commitment, he and his wife would be killed. So I said I did not sign such an agreement. So being the AGI director, it's a much better deal. So that's what I'm trying to say. Okay. Kishore, I agree that don't get me wrong. Of course, as a Chinese who especially grew up in Hunan, I would never want to see the U.S. and China to really get into any real conflict. By all means, I would like there to be only long, forever lasting peace. Okay, so now let me, while you are all still excited, now let me turn the mic to you. Okay, who would like to go first? Armstrong?
I think my question should be for Kishore. Are you a communist member? Oh, how much the communists pay you to speak here? So come back. Actually, I'm a fellow of AGI this year, and I'm a communist member. I formerly worked for the Central Bank of China, and now I became a lawyer, a senior partner of Dentons, Shanghai. So actually, even last night, there is our speaker do the similar presentation, and after the presentation, I told him that I'm a communist member. He told me that he has many friends as a communist member, but they are all very common to communicate. So today we find the fact that the communist name should be changed, just as Victor suggested. And I'm pretty sure the AGI, when you select the members, do you mind that this member should be a communist member or not? I don't think so. So it's not the standards to divide it into good and evil, just for you are from mainland China or you are from the West or other regions. So thank you so much for the comments of Kishore. I think you expressed a very objective attitude from the mainlanders' perspective. And we do hope that in the future, AGI could be a platform for the communication between the West and the East, the mainlanders and Hong Kongese, as well as from the industries to the academics to the other professionals. So that's my comments. Thank you.
Can I just respond? I must say I'm very puzzled by your comment. You began with a very rude suggestion that I was being paid by the Communist Party of China. So let me declare for the record that I haven't collected a penny from the Communist Party of China. Nor do I have the need to be paid by anybody. But I do feel, I'm now 70 years old. I do feel a moral obligation. I've worked for 48 years in geopolitics. And after working 48 years in geopolitics, I have some understanding of what happens in the field. I'm about to see a great tragedy unfold within the United States and China. It is going to unfold. I'm prepared to take bets publicly with any of you. So I'm doing my best to prevent that tragedy from happening. But to prevent that tragedy from happening, it's very important that everybody in the room understands that there's no black and white solution to this problem. It's a very complex and difficult issues, and both sides have right on their side, and both sides also have wrong on their side. And to answer Sam's point about what happened between 2001 and 2019 between China and American business, I can tell you that the biggest strategic mistake that China has made in the last 20 decades has been to alienate the American business community. The American business community used to be the #1 supporter of China, and suddenly, when the latest round of trade war began, the United States business community kept absolutely silent. And that's the result of a strategic mistake made by China. And so what I do in my book, actually, I point out this. So far, I've been discussing, in a sense, what the mistakes made by the United States. But there have also been mistakes made by China. And the critical thing is to have people who are prepared to be objective and dispassionate and rational and neutral. And I see that as my contribution to the debate between the United States and China, because I'm not involved. I'm neither American, nor am I Chinese.
George.
Thank you. My name is George Rwanda. I'm 2018 Global Fellow. I'm trying to reconcile this panel with the previous panel, which talked about how the WTO can actually remain relevant. And then this panel is like China and the US in 10 years' time are not exactly going to be friendly. It's going to get worse. Because naturally, these divisions are going to lead to countries taking sides. For us in South Africa, for example, the government has made it clear that Huawei is our partner. And slowly you're seeing tensions even in the country, within the party and whatever. So it's also leading to tensions in other countries, and countries that don't even understand very well what's happening between China and America. So I'm trying to reconcile the role of multilateralism, if you could put it that way, as was said in the previous panels, and the current discussion you're having here. Does it mean that we're going to see almost a decoupling between political issues and economic issues, or is it economic issues and political issues coming together to cause more problems? I'm kind of confused there.
Thank you. Who would like to talk about this?
I guess let me pick up on Kishore's point, which is that we all were heavily involved. I was still working when China was trying to get into the WTO. We lobbied aggressively, as you might recall. All the large corporations of the world lobby aggressively in support of that initiative. But there was an assumption that there would be compliance to the standards of the WTO. And I'll let other people in the room that have deep knowledge. I only have my own personal experience where there have been, on both sides, by the way. I mean, again, this is bilateral misbehavior. I'm not going to defend. It's impossible to defend the current administration. If you're a rational human being, you can't defend it. But it's bilateral. So, I mean, the point of it being is that there was an expectation that the governing bodies, that if you were a member of it, there was an enforcement mechanism that you would comply. And obviously that mechanism has broken down. I mean, I can take you back to Buy America when Obama was president, and everybody loves that, right? I mean, in this room. But there was a clause in Buy America that my cousin put in there, named Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, that basically led to the tariff wars over tires. But it began with, if you're going to do any infrastructure projects in the United States, you have to have all your components bought in America, right? So, again, that's in violation of the WTO, quite honestly. So, I mean, I'll give you both sides of the story, but my only point of the thing is that some of these governing mechanisms that we all relied upon for years, for whatever reasons, from what I could understand, have lost their enforcement capability.
Just a quick word. I think the key word you use is multilateral. And at the end of the day, if there's ever going to be a solution to many of the world's problems, the only way to solve the world's problems is to get everybody in the world involved, all the 7.5 billion people in the world involved. And having been ambassador to the UN for over 10 years, I can tell you that if you really want to understand what 7.5 billion people think about any subject, go to the UN, talk to the ambassadors, and you get a very good sense of how different countries view things differently. So if you want to find a solution on, let's say, trade, what is right, what is wrong in trade, and so on and so forth, then I would say take it to a multilateral body, certainly like the World Trade Organization. And I also agree with you that when China negotiated its way into the WTO, it did negotiate its entry as a developing country member, and it was entitled to. It was, per capita income then was less than $2,000 or something like that. But having emerged as the world's second largest economy, it was a strategic mistake on the part of the Chinese not to at least begin unilaterally giving up some of those concessions as a way of ensuring that the kind of anger that is developed against China in the economies in the United States and Europe is therefore diffused. China should have taken some preemptive action to try and prevent the kind of anti-China sentiment on the economic area developing in the way it is. But the best way to, again, resolve this is to take it back to the WTO, discuss it in the WTO, and then work out new rules that would apply to the world's largest, second largest economy, China.
Okay, we are running out of time, but Victor has the last question or comment.
Shouldn't be that way.
No, okay.
But okay, I'll just make two very quick points. The first point is I am really absolutely happy and amazed at the type of discussion that we have witnessed this afternoon. I think the depth of discussion, this last panel, I think I really learned a lot and really jogged me to think a lot deeper about the issues. But I want to address the issue that George raised. You know, how does all this reconcile with this beautiful picture of a potential multilateral world? I think the answer is very simple. We're witnessing a transition. We're in the midst of a transition. Now, how the transition is going to work, okay, is going to be anybody's guess. But before we can make a rational transition that doesn't derail the whole system into, you know, what our friend Graham Allison keeps reminding us, you know, is really a deep understanding of the positions of both sides. And I appreciate the way you kind of outline starkly and perhaps, you know, really without pulling any punches, the deep divisions between the two sides. Unless we're able to recognize that and not just stay with our old beliefs, I don't think we're going to be able to make the transition smoothly. So I think I'm an eternal optimist. I'm really thinking that the world is not going to go the, shall we say, the bad route, and that we're able to evolve. And I think that has to be eventually a multilateral world. Now, it won't be the multilateral world that we left, okay? But I think it will be a multilateral world that we need to build for the future, based on all the things that we discuss, how we do it from ground up, et cetera, looking at sustainable, you know, inclusive growth, et cetera. But I think we will move in that direction. And frankly, I don't think we have any choice but to be able to do it. But how we do it is really the real question. And I think we need to start with a very open acceptance of hearing things that are very uncomfortable to us. You know, there's a Chinese saying, you know, sort of sage advice is always uncomfortable to the ear, you know. And I think we need to begin to actually address that before we can kind of make the move. But I think, you know, we are moving towards that new multilateralism. And I hope that future meetings of this group could actually make, you know, step-by-step movement towards that new And it's this, you know, what you were talking about, we were discussing in your lecture last night, Ezra. You know, this idea of transition from a unimodal world to a multimodal world. That's not going to be an easy transition. You know, and we may want to transition into a system which may have not the question of alpha males. It may be much more of a community. Well, I mean, that's really, I don't want to take up more time. But I think I'd like to just say how much I appreciate the way that you've actually jogged my own thoughts on the whole subject.
Thank you, Victor. This is a great summary of this session and the Asia Global Dialogue today. So let's again thank the two experts, guests on the stage. And also, I would like to use this opportunity again to thank Victor. So far, you know, many of you may not have acknowledged how much efforts Victor has put into the planning and structuring of the Asia Global Dialogue program. The very fact that he has been here all day today, from very early on this morning, and then yesterday, just shows for someone as busy as he is to spend so much time on this dialogue program. It's just very extraordinary. So thank you, Victor. And then Victor just reminded me, our staff, of course, should be thanked. So this morning I mentioned Yvonne Mack. Where is she? Oh, okay. And then Ines in the back, Beth, Joyce, and of course all of you here today, and Anna, so for doing such a wonderful job moderating the whole conference today. Okay, thank you. Come back again next year. Okay, thank you.